with casting chariots and horse quick to his prayed-for aid, shall nothing profit. Perish then, till cruelest death hath laid at all the red feet of revenge for my slain friend, and all with whom the absence of my hands made yours a festival. This speech great Xanthus more enraged, and made his spirit contend for means to shut up the oped vein against him, and defend the Trojans in it from his plague. And made his spirit to contend for means to shut up the oped vein against him, and defend the Trojans in it from his plague. In meantime, Peleus' son, and now that long lance he... In meantime, Peleus' son, and now with that long lance he hid, for more blood set upon Asteropaeus. For more blood set upon Asteropaeus, the descent of Pelagon, and he of broad-streamed Axius, and the dame of first nativity, to all the daughters that renowned Acasemenus' seed, bright Peribea. Acasemenus. Peribea. Pelagon. Xanthus Thetis, Thetides. Okay. Renowned Acasemenus' seed, bright Peribea, whom the flood armed Peribea, whom the flood armed thick with lofty reed compressed. At her grandchild compressed. At her grandchild now went Thetis' great son, whose foe stood armed with 2 darts, being set on by At her grandchild now went Thetis' great son, whose foe stood armed with 2 darts, being set on by Xanthus, angered so for those youths' blood shed in his stream by vengeful Thetis' son, without all mercy. Both being near, great Thetides begun with this high question. All right, we're going to need an Asteropaeus voice soon, but let's pull in Achilles for now. Let us ask some prophet, priest, or prove some dream interpreter. With this high question, of what race art thou that darest oppose thy powers to mine? That darest oppose thy power to mine? Cursed womb, that darest oppose thy power to mine? That darest oppose thy power to mine thus? Cursed wombs they ever did disclose that stood my anger. Cursed wombs they ever did disclose that stood my anger. He replied. All right, let's put a note for Asteropaeus. Okay. Today is 16. Asteropaeus. That stood my anger. What makes thy fury's heat talk and see pedigrees? That's probably good. Disclose that stood my anger. He replied, what makes thy fury's heat talk and see pedigrees? Far hence. What makes thy fury's heat talk and see pedigrees? Far hence lies my innative seat in rich Paeonia. My race from broad-streamed Axius runs. Axius that gives earth purest drink of all that gives earth purest drink of all the watery sons of great Oceanus, and got the famous for his spear Pelagonus that fathered me. And these Paeonians here, armed with long lances, here I lead. Pelagonus? Yeah. Paeonian. Okay, I wrote Paeonians. That was probably a typo. I wouldn't have said Paeon. Yeah, I don't see why I would have said Paeonians. That fathered me, and these Paeonians here, and these that got the famous for his spear Pelagonus that fathered me. And these Paeonians here, armed with long lances, here I lead. And here the 11th fair light shine. And here the 11th fair light shines on us since we entered Troy. Come now, brave man, let's fight. Thus spake he, threatening, and to him Pelides made reply with shaken Peleus. But his foe with two at once let fly. And to him Pelides made reply with shaken Peleus. But his foe with two at once let fly, for both his hands were dexterous. One javelin struck the shield of Thetis' son, but struck not through. The gold, God's gift, repelled the eager point. The other lance fell lightly on the part of his fair right hand's cubit. Forth the black blood spun. The dart glanced over, fastening on the earth, and there his spleen was spent that wished the body. The body, with which wish Achilles his lance sent, that quite missed, and infixed itself fast in the steep up shore, even to the midst it entered it. I don't love that. I'm going to redo that part. Thus spake he, threatening. And to him Pelides made reply with shaken Peleus. But his foe with two at once let fly, but his foe with two at once let fly, for both his hands were dexterous. One javelin struck the shield of Thetis' son, but struck not through. The gold, God's gift, repelled the eager point. The other lance fell lightly on the part of his fair right hand's cubit. Forth the black blood spun. The dart glanced over, fastening on the earth, and there his spleen was spent that wished the body. With which wish Achilles his lance sent, that quite missed, and infixed itself fast in the steep upshore. Even to the midst it entered it. Himself then fiercely bore upon his enemy with his sword. His foe was tugging hard to get his lance out. Thrice he plucked, and thrice sure Peleus barred his wished evulsion. The fourth pluck he bowed and meant to break the ashen part. But ere that act, Achilles' sword did check. His bent power. Achilles' sword did check his bent power, and break out his soul. Full in the navel stead he ripped his belly up, and out his entrails fell, and dead his breast and dead his breathless body, whence his arms Achilles drew, and said, Lie there, lie there, and said, Lie there, and prove it dangerous to lift up adverse head against Jove's sons. Although Jove's sons, although a flood were ancestor to thee, although a flood were ancestor to thee, although a flood were ancestor to thee. Thy vaunts urged him, but I may vaunt a higher pedigree, from Jove himself. King Peleus was son to Aeacus, infernal Aeacus to Jove, and I to Peleus. Thunder-voiced Jove far passeth floods, that only murmurs raise with earth and water as they run with tribute to the seas. And his seed theirs exceeds as far. Theirs exceeds as far. A flood, a mighty flood, raged near thee now, but with no aid. Near thee now, but with no aid. But with no aid. Jove must not be withstood. Jove must not be withstood. King Achelous yields to him, and great Oceanus, whence all the floods, all the sea, all founts, wells. Let's check Achelous real quick. Achelous. King Achelous be withstood. King Achelous yields to him, and great Oceanus, whence all floods, all the sea, all founts, wells, all deep humorous, fetch their beginnings. Yet even he fears Jove's flash, and the crack his thunder gives, when out of heaven it tears atu his rack. Thus plucked he from the shore his lance, and left the waves to wash the wave-sprung entrails, about which Phaucens and other fish did shoal. Phaucens? Phaucen? This dictionary cites Chapman's Iliad as the usage example. Okay. Okay, this says Faucen. Okay. Let's put that in the guide, I guess. The thing about words like this is I don't think anybody's going to listen to the audiobook and say like, hey, he pronounced Faucens wrong. Because if it's such a rare word that it doesn't appear almost anywhere except for Chapman's Iliad, I don't imagine a lot of people are really pronouncing it. Thus plucked he from the shore his lance, and left the waves to wash the wave-sprung entrails, about which Phaucens and other fish did shoal, to nibble at the fat which his sweet kidneys hid. This for himself. Now to his men, the well-rowed Paeans did shoal, to nibble at the fat which his sweet kidneys hid. This for himself. Now to his men, the well-rowed peons did his rage contend, all which cold fear shook into flight to see their captain slain, at whose mazed flight as much enraged flew he, and then fell all these, Thracius, Mydon, Astipolis. All right, let's just start reading names. Thracius, I thought it would be that. Mydon, Astipolis, Ophelestes, Aeneas, Menessus, Thersilicus. All right, good. At whose mazed flight as much enraged flew he, and then fell all these, Thracius, Mydon, Astipolis, great Ophelestes, Aeneas, Menessus, Thersilicus. And on these many more had fallen, unless the angry flood had took the figure of a man, and in a whirlpit stood, thus speaking to Iacides. All right, let's give Xanthus a voice here. Past all power feeds thy will, thou great grandchild of Aeacus. Past all power feeds thy will. Something like that. Past... That's not good. Past all power feeds thy will. Something like that, I feel like. In a whirlpit stood, thus speaking to Iacides. Past all power feeds thy will. Past all power feeds thy will, thou great grandchild of Aeacus. And past all thou'rt in ill, and gods themselves confederates. Thou'rt in ill, and gods themselves confederates, and Jove, the best of gods, all deaths gives thee. Past all power feeds thy will, thou great grandchild of Aeacus. Sounds too much like Achilles' voice. Past all power feeds. Thus speaking to Iacides. Past all power feeds thy will, thou great grandchild of Aeacus. And past all thou'rt in ill, and gods themselves confederates, and Jove, the best of gods, all deaths gives thee, all places not. Make my shores periods to all shore service. In the field let thy field axe run high, not in my waters. Field axe run high, not in my waters. My sweet streams choke with more. In the field let thy field axe run high, not in my waters. My sweet streams choke with mortality of men slain by thee. Carcasses so glut me that I fail to pour into the sacred sea my waves, yet still assail thy cruel forces. Cease, amaze affects me with thy... Cease, amaze affects me with thy rage, prince of the people. Of the people. He replied, of the people. He replied, Shall thy command assuage? Let us ask. He replied, Shall thy command assuage, gulf-fed Scamander, my free wrath? I'll never leave pursued proud Ilian's slaughters, till this hand in her filed walls conclude her flying forces, and hath tried in single fight the chance of war with Hector. In single fight the chance of war with Hector, whose event with stark death shall advance upon. Whose event with stark death shall advance one of our conquests. Whose event with stark death shall advance one of our conquests. Thus again he like a fury flew upon the Trojans. Thus again he like a fury flew upon the Trojans. When the flood his sad plaint did pursue upon the Trojans. When the flood his sad plaint did pursue to bright Apollo, telling him he was too negligent of Jove's high charge. Telling him he was too negligent of Jove's high charge, importuning by all means vehement his help of Troy till latest even should her black shadows pour on earth's broad breast. In all his worst, Achilles yet from shore leapt to his midst. Then swelled his waves, then raged, then swelled his waves, then raged, then boiled again against Achilles. Up flew all, and all the bodies slain in all his deeps, of which the heaps made bridges to his waves, he belched out, roaring like a bull. The unslain yet he saves, in his black whirlpits vast and deep. A horrid billow stood about Achilles. On his shield the violence of the flood beat so, it drave him back. The flood beat so it drave him back, and took his feet up, his fair palm enforced to catch into his stay a broad and lofty elm, whose roots he tossed up with his hold, and tore up all the shore. With this then he repelled the waves, and those thick arms it bore he made a bridge to bear him off, for all fell in when he forth from the channel threw himself. The rage did terrify even his great spirit, and made him add wings to his swiftest feet, and tread the land. And yet not there the flood left his retreat, but thrust his billows after him, and blacked them all at top, to make him fear and fly his charge, and set the broad field ope for Troy to scape in. He sprung out a dart's cast, but came on again with a redoubled force. As when the swiftest flown and strongest of all fowls, Jove's black hawk, the huntress, stoops upon a much-loved quarry, so charged he, his arms with horror wrung against his arms with horror wrung against the black waves. Yet again he was so urged, he flung his body from the flood and fled. And after him again the waves flew roaring. And after him again the waves flew roaring. As a man that finds a water vein, and from some black fount is to bring his streams through plants and groves, goes with his mattock, and all checks set to his course removes. When that runs freely, under it the pebbles all give way, and where it finds a fall, runs swift. Nor can the leader stay his current then, before himself full-paced it murmurs on. So of Achilles evermore the strong flood vantage won. Though most deliver, gods are still above the powers of men. As oft as the able godlike man endeavored to maintain his charge on them that kept the flood, and charged as he would try if all the gods inhabiting the broad unreached sky could daunt his spirit, so oft still the rude waves charged him round. Ramped on his shoulders, from whose depth his strength and spirit would bound up to the free air. Vexed in soul. And now the vehement flood made faint his knees, so overthwart his waves were. They withstood all the denied dust, which he wished, and now was fain to cry, casting his eyes so that broad heaven that late he longed to try, and said, casting his eyes to that broad heaven that late he longed to try, and said, O Jove, how am I? Let us ask some. And said, O Jove, how am I left? No god vouchsafes to free me, miserable man. Help now, and after torture me with any outrage. Would to heaven Hector, the mightiest bred in this region, had imbrued his javelin in my breast, that strong may fall by strong. Where now weak water's luxury must make my death blush, one heaven-born shall like a hog herd die, drowned in a dirty torrent's rage. Yet none of you in heaven I blame for this, but she alone, by whom this life was given, that now must die thus. She would still delude me with her tales, affirming Phoebus' shafts should end within the Trojan walls, my cursed beginning. My cursed beginning. In this strait, Neptune and Pallas flew to fetch him off. In men's shapes both close to his danger drew, and taking both hands, thus spake the shaker of the world. Neptune Father of gods, will any man? And taking both hands, thus spake the Shaker of the world. The Shaker of the world. Pelides, do not stir a foot, nor these waves proudly curled against thy bold breast fear a jot. Thou hast us too proudly curled against thy breast, proudly curled against thy bold breast fear a jot. Thou hast us too, thy friends, Neptune and Pallas, Jove himself approving the aid we lend. 'Tis nothing as thou fear'st with fate. She will not see thee drowned. This height shall soon down. Thine own eyes shall see it set aground. Be ruled then, will advise thee well. Take not thy hand away from putting all indifferently to all that it can lay upon the Trojans. Till the walls of haughty Ilion conclude all in a desperate flight. Take not thy hand away from putting all indifferently to all that it can lay upon the Trojans, till the walls of haughty Ilion conclude all in a desperate flight. And when thou hast set gone the soul of Hector, turn to fleet, our hands shall plant a wreath of endless glory on thy brows. Thus to the free from death both made retreat. He, much impelled by charge the godheads gave, the field that was now overcome with many a boundless wave, he overcame. On their wild breasts they tossed the carcasses and arms of many a slaughtered man. And now the winged knees of this great captain bore aloft. Against the flood he flies with full assault. Nor could that god make shrink his rescued thighs.